Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. It's a beautiful day here and I'm just looking back out over Palm Beach, that little island out on the, just to the right of my head up here. That's Nani Island. I used to go out there when I was a kid with my dad and those handmade wooden canoes and dinghies that he used to make with my grandfather, and we'd row out there. And in those days the island was covered in seabirds who were busy because there were so many fish in the water that the island was a place where you get dive bombed when you landed there. And today there's hardly any seabirds left on that island. Also the big crabs that used to run across the rocks are all gone, and it's almost a bit barren out there really. That's how much things have changed in these waters on this coastline since I grew up. But anyway, today I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things. First of all, Christopher Luxon and his coverage on TVNZ Breakfast this morning. For those of you who did watch this, you would have seen that he deflected away from questions about charter schools and how there's been a terrible response really. The questions were mostly about whether the investment that's been made by the government is good value for money, when there's really only been 4 schools that have taken up the opportunity to become a charter school, and maybe there were a couple more floating around in the wings. But Christopher Luxon had been taught some recited spin overnight. And how do I know that? Well, because whenever he says, let's take a step back just for a minute, he always inserts what he's just learned and what he's supposed to say, for, his talking points for the morning. So he said the following. He went, let's take a step back, and then he said, we want charter schools to be a feature of our education system. So this was kind of bland. It wasn't really specific in nature, and he certainly wasn't answering the question about whether it was good value for money. In the end, all he said was, look, if there's money left over that we haven't spent, I'm sure it will be recycled and go back into more attempts to have charter schools. But the truth of the matter is, you and I both know that New Zealand has really spoken here and said, we don't want these charter schools. There's the odd time that you might want something specialist that does work, but in general, we want our standardised state education for our children across the nation. And can you just stop making exceptions for the ACT Party? So this was really a case, again, of a junior party wagging the major party in the coalition agreement process when it came to charter schools. A hobby horse, an ideological dogma that Davy Boy had brought to us all. But it was clearly not good value for money, and Christopher Luxon wasn't able to be straight up and honest with New Zealanders like we see from the whole National Party. It's just not an honest operation, is it? It's never able to do a straight answer to a straight question. It always has to deflect. Let's step back for a minute and talk about my rehearsed talking points. So that was the first item that really, kind of bothered everybody, I suppose, on TVNZ Breakfast. And then the other one was about boot camps and how, with an 80% reoffending rate, the idea of just stacking an ACT Party boot camp or military academy on the front of the wraparound services when you go back into the community, etc., family, everybody that gets around you, putting this kind of boot camp on the front and jamming it together kind of like a Frankenstein, some ACT Party head on top of a more researched and evidence-based body. This basic setup was never going to work, and the trial basically just showed us all that it didn't work. And despite the evidence and the fact that their own trial wasn't going to work, here was Christopher Luxon committing to carry on with something that is proven not to work. 80% reoffending is not success. And he tried to blame it all on, well, when we put these kids back into their community and they got with their mates, well, they returned to their old behaviour, and these are the toughest of the tough kids, is the way he kind of looked at it all. But right from the start with boot camps, it was always going to fail. The government wouldn't listen to people that over and over again told them what the evidence said, but they had a tin ear and they were committed to jamming the ACT Party boot camp and the military academy things, the get tough, fictional bullshit that doesn't work. that people that listen to Newscrap ZB cling on to and keep insisting is the way to go. And yet again, here's another example of it not working. But despite that, they're going to carry on with the myth and do things that just don't work. So policies that don't work are being perpetuated by a government that people keep voting for. And why do you keep voting for a government that does this? This is the whole problem. The other thing is the leadership itself is now being questioned. Around media, we saw, various commentary now in the commentariat about how Erica stood out because she only had 18 errors in the math resources. So she stood out from all the rest of them. So maybe she would be a good candidate for the leadership. And this was Duplicity talking away in the New Zealand Herald about maybe Erica isn't really the answer, and possibly there is no answer really for the National Party right now as it begins to sink in the polls. So this morning we saw a poll come out from the Taxpayers Union, who had commissioned Courier, who were the Nationals pollster, to give them some kind of upside, some kind of better than usual outlook right now, maybe to save and stall some time for Christopher Luxon. So basically we saw National on about 31%, we saw Labour leading in the polls, and we saw the minor parties all kind of around about where they normally are. Greens probably down a little bit from where they normally are in the other polls, ACT slightly up, even though they'd gone down since the last Courier poll. So what was funny about all of this was really the way that Radio New Zealand made bloopers this morning, and I put on my page that they'd said that 202% of us thought that Chris Hipkins was the preferred Prime Minister, which was just a blooper, a typo that is going to be made in an environment where a government comes along and cuts all the funding at Radio New Zealand because it doesn't like well-resourced media, it doesn't like accountability, it doesn't like transparency. And so you start seeing these kind of terrible errors. And, I know I'm guilty of shocking spelling all the time, and it's quite hilarious, really. But then again, I'm not a commercial media. I'm not owned by the government. The government aren't kind of behind the scenes dictating to me, what the standards are. It's all, on me if I make a spelling mistake. But here was Radio New Zealand. That was a bit bad. It was a bit shoddy because it wasn't the only mistake. Now, it might have been early in the morning before the guys had any coffee, but it was still pretty funny. So I put it up there, and we're going to see a lot more polls now. And the polls that are coming, they're more accredited polls than the National Party pollster who resigned from the Research Association of New Zealand and couldn't hack the standards, the proper methodologies. So he cried off, and now we're going to have probably a TVNZ variant poll. We're probably going to have another RNZ Read Research poll. The next poll we're likely to see will likely be a Talbot Mills poll, unless, of course, Thomas Coughlan hides it at the Herald, or the media collude to hide those results like they have done in previous months this year, because they don't really want bad news for this government. This government's the money that pays commercial media for a lot of its advertising. So there are allegiances and alliances and biases and prejudices in our media. Because they are, as I said, and I've said before, these are free enterprises in it for a buck. They're in it to make a profit. They have shareholders, and the first duty is to the dividends for the shareholders. The second duty may be something to do with some kind of fourth estate, democratic, noble ideals. But it's certainly mainly a commercial organisation, first and foremost, and so you've got to make a profit so that everyone can be paid. And a lot of these guys, maybe they're not paid so well. So you're not necessarily getting the most quality people in the media reporting. On this front, this dovetails quite nicely into the way in which we saw a kind of an attack on the Labour Party for not doing the bidding of the media. The media are quite hungry for Labour Party policy right now, because Nicola Willis has said, I don't see the Labour Party providing all the solutions to the economy. I don't see the Labour Party coming out just yet with its tax policy that we can attack and beat up and talk about all day long. So you, the media, you do my bidding and go after Labour. So how does that manifest? Well, you see it with them taking up a very small, tiny implication from the idea that the Green Party in its AGM, they did 2 speeches that I watched four times. I watched those speeches, and they were really all about, we're staring down the barrel of a one-term government right now. They were all about transformational change. They were about these 4 foundational charters that the Greens have, you know, that are good for our way of life and well-being, based on our environment. And it all made a lot of sense to me personally. I mean, I thought there was great speeches from both Chloe and Marama, and there was no mention at all in any of that about the Labour Party. In fact, you know, the Greens and the Labour Party, they get on really well, and everyone gets that. We get the fact that we're very aligned, and there are some minor differences, and you know, during an election year, everyone's going to bat for themselves. But what do the media do? Well, they listen to Nicola Willis and they go, how can we attack Labour? So what they do is they create a wedge issue, and it's a media creation. It's a media crafted beat up, and then they pass it around like pass the parcel. So it started off, this whole attack on Labour, with Jamie Ensor at the New Zealand Herald writing a couple of articles about this and this wedge issue, if he could split the left bloc and take attention away from Christopher Luxon's failings, the bad polls that the National Party are going through, and obviously seeing a lot worse polling in their internal polling than we're seeing publicly, because things will be weighted, you know, here or there, a couple of percent. So what we're starting to see there is Jamie Ensor at the Herald, the NZME organisation chaired by former National MP Stephen Joyce, and we're seeing this kind of influence trickling down. Nobody wants to lose their job, so you better step in line here at the NZME asset, the New Zealand Herald. And then that gets taken up by TVNZ, who have recently been warned that they could be biased, and they're looking into it themselves because maybe they haven't criticised the left bloc enough, because National have gone from about 38% down to 31%, and are probably polling around 29 or 28% in a proper poll right now, because they've been really, really bad. And I'll talk about how bad they've been in a minute, but first let's just keep talking about this. Jenny May went to war on Labour this morning on TVNZ breakfast, and she ploughed into Chloe, and Chloe was just saying, hey, look, yeah, you know, positive news about all the kind of great ideas and papers, the 4 things that have been put out, like policy directions, strategies, statements, some research, etc., that show that we could actually afford to have these finer things, that we could have these benefits. Like, for example, on G News, we've talked about the radical but you know, very probable and likely and feasible idea that we could afford to have free dental if we stop listening to these Ruth Richardson era people about debt, and we stop being so conservative in our thinking about borrowing. We're guilt-tripped, you know, into thinking that we're doing something bad here if we just adequately fund our public services and we provide better care and we bring dental into the public health system, for example. So these kind of benefits, and there are many of them that we could actually have, we deny ourselves because we're stuck in a neoliberal mindset. And so the neoliberals have got a grip because they've got all the money, right? And they own a lot of the key positions of influence within our media organisations. So you start getting these kind of editorials that come out that go, Labour bad, National good, don't look at National, look at Labour. Oh, look, the Greens have come out with something. How can we twist this around into a wedge issue against Labour? Now we're seeing at Radio New Zealand, who, you know, do kind of have the owner of them as the government, and they're seeing their independence possibly being threatened. We've got an acting political editor there in Craig McCulloch, and he's seen that TVNZ have done this. He's seen that the Herald has got some clicks, you know, there. So how can Craig tell a story today? Well, you know, he's just gone and said, well, maybe the tail, which is the Greens, is wagging the Labour dog, because we're seeing that with smaller parties in the government at the moment. But, you know, it's all conjured up by the media. This has nothing to do with Labour or the Greens and what they are saying about each other. It may be the case that some of the ideas that are expressed by the Greens go a bit further than the Labour Party have in the past, but we don't know what Labour's doing at the moment. It's got its own democratic processes. It goes out to its party roots and it asks everybody from the ground up about policy ideas. So that's a process that the media should respect. And it also should respect that Labour have repeatedly told them that they'll be announcing their tax policy before the end of the year, so just please be patient. This is well in advance of Chris Bishop. Chris Bishop has told media that National are not going to have a bar of announcing any policy about things like asset recycling this side of Christmas, so you'll just have to wait. Now, what I observe is that there's no headlines that sort of challenge this in a consistent way from Craig McCulloch. There's no debate about this from Jenny May or the producers of The Breakfast Show who write her questions for her that she reads. And there's no challenge about this from Jamie Ensor or his political editor, Thomas Coughlan. So there's kind of a really blatant double standard here from those media organisations when it comes to why aren't you going on a fully balanced attack against National about its election policies today, if you're going to do this about Labour? And that's basically what it boils down to, is that Labour haven't given you something to gnaw on, a bone to gnaw on. So you're going after them using the Greens because the Greens are progressive, and New Zealand could do with some progressiveness. And what I think most of us on the left want to see is an alignment between our good friends, all of those three parties, agree on all the things you agree on. Fairness when it comes to taxation, fairness when it comes to women's pay and pay equity, fairness when it comes to our regulation and what we do in the shadows. No, what we do when it comes to the Regulatory Standards Bill and these kind of stacked situations we've got, how we fully fund our health system, how we look after our people, how we make it accessible for everybody around New Zealand, no matter where you come from, that if you're not well, you can see a doctor and you can afford it and you can have an operation, but you don't farm this out privately to people and make it inaccessible, because ultimately the privatisation takes away the accessibility and makes it unaffordable for the majority of people. So we don't want that. People on the left care about everybody else and not just themselves. So that's what I think we're seeing, and it's disappointing to see the media not caring about everybody and doing these kind of attacks. Lastly, I just want to talk in this little update about pay equity and today's People Select Committee. So I've actually recorded about 2.5 hours of today's People Select Committee. I approached Marilyn Waring last week, and she was very humble and wonderful, and she said, look, I'm not the story, Jared, so you can interview as many people as you like this week if you want. But the point is that this is the story. It's the story of all the women who are low paid, I'll get my terminology right, low paid women who have actually had their pay equity claims cancelled, and they've had the thresholds raised, and they've been denied a kind of a justice here, because this is an old fight that women have been fighting for a long time, and it's counter so many things in our law and good lawmaking. It's counter natural justice. It's just an abomination that this government has come in and in secrecy, without any kind of scrutiny applied to them, applied this Project 10. And you wouldn't believe it, but people actually continue to vote for people like Chris Bishop, and people like Nicola Willis and Erica, who are doing this to low-income women. So the content that's in the People Select Committee is on my page, but it's only there because it's the most important thing, and Marilyn said that was the case. It's not about her, it's about the content in that select committee, all the people and what they actually have to say. So you've got teachers, and the teachers are talking there. You've got nurses, and the nurses are talking there. You've got academics and professors talking there who've been talking for decades about this. You've got people that are looking after the aged care workers. You've got retired high, court judges, and you've got, all of the finest women, really, and a few damn good men in there as well, speaking up for their daughters and granddaughters and fairness and what we're about in this country. So please do take the opportunity to watch some of that content if you do get a spare half hour. I've got 2.5 hours of it there sitting there. You can find it online if you really want to. Just type in the People's Select Committee and you will find the page. I'm sure it's all there on their website as well. Anyway, that was roughly all I had to say. As you know, I'm going to be doing a little bit of local body election style coverage coming up soon. Mainly because I wanted to learn more about it all. But I found there's a few guys here running in the elections for the local board here, and some of them have got quite interesting stories, and I like to tell visual stories, so I won't be able to get around everybody, but the ones I haven't already covered on G News one way or another, I'll probably talk to a few of them. So there's that to look forward to. Anyway, it's a very beautiful day here. The beach behind me up here, that one there, one of those boat sheds down there, my grandfather used to have it. He built it and it's still there. And I haven't been to that boat shed now for about 30 years because, well, my grandfather passed away. And I can still recall the smell of the shells and the old Johnson engine in there and the oil. There was a rusty old canvas over this Johnson engine, and we had a couple of dinghies, and we had some kayaks, and we had an old boat that we called the Stingray, and out we went fishing at places like that. And off the back there were quite a few snapper, and of course all around this coastline. It was very beautiful, and today it's become a bit of a barren wasteland, and I no longer get to go to that boat shed down there in what I call Boat Shed Bay. Anyway, those are all parts of my life that have changed, but they're still here today. And I identify with people who have lost land or lost property and still kind of grieve in a way for the past and how it used to be and the life that we could have still. The good news is that nature's really good at regenerating, and if we just give it a chance, this can all come back again, and more people, our children, our grandchildren, can enjoy these places. So that's all I really wanted to say to you today. I hope you have a wonderful day for the rest of your Monday, and I will talk to you as soon as possible once again. See you all later.
Welcome to G News, the good news.